All right, today I thought, at least in part, we might go on to other things, but I thought we'd take a look at some of your articles that you looked at. So I've tried to look up some of them. I don't know if I have all of them. We'll see how far we go. But this one comes from the Jordan Times. That's one of my favorites, I guess because I spent a lot of time in Jordan. So I've been reading the Jordan Times on and off for a long time. Because, you know, when I'm in Jordan, that's has been one of the few English newspapers. I mean, they actually print it, and you can buy it for a small amount of money and get some news that you can understand, kind of get an idea what's going on. Of course, the Jordan Times, you have to remember, like many of these newspapers, is funded by the government. So some people claim that maybe there is some censorship or some control there. I think over the years that's gotten better. But this is the kind of thing I'm looking for you to do, is to get a local perspective on things that are going on. I noticed we get a kayak ad as well. And I know why I'm getting that, because they're always watching me. I'm going to Atlanta to a conference, and they know that, so they're trying to sell me a hotel. How do they know? Well, they do. So this one is from Mosul, Iraq, which is interesting. And notice the name Daesh. Are you familiar with that term? What is Daesh? This was your article, right?
Yeah, it's like ISIS or ISIL, isn't that just what they call it?
Yes, yeah, because it's sort of, I think some of them don't want to call it ISIS because they think it gives it credibility. You know, it gives it saying that it is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which is what ISIS stands for, and ISIL is another. In other words, that's claiming that it really is, that name sort of claims that it's legitimized, I guess. Daesh is a not as legitimizing of a name. Okay. So here it's talking about they have been ousted from the city of Mosul. If you've been paying attention to the news, that was a major battle. And this was one of the last strongholds in Iraq of this group. So what is your article telling us about? I see we've got some, looks like mostly ladies here. I guess there's some guys. Lots of books on the ground. What's going on? You remember your article?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's talking about the reemergence of culture, especially through literature, because a big part of their tactics was burning down structures as like libraries and bookstores because they want like freedom of thought or like knowledge type of stuff. So and it talked about a specific like cafe that was like a book cafe.
Book cafe.
Gender cafe, and it's just a place where people can come and like have conversations. And it was a big deal because it was mixed gender, and they built a structure and are like getting literature.
Huh. So mixed, men and women could come to this cafe, talk about literature, drink coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was ironic because I actually saw like the same article on Twitter yesterday after doing this about how their like library that had been burned down, they just rebuilt it, and it like was being stopped.
Okay. So this is talking about the sort of resurgence of culture, and I guess also sort of a, what do I want to say, defiance, right? That these guys came in, they burned the libraries up, they imposed a lot of rules, and now they've been pushed out, and so now we're going to try to go back and restore that. That's interesting because, you know, we think of coffee shops as being, I guess, starting in Seattle or something. But in fact, in Arab culture, coffee shops started very early on because coffee was introduced in the Arabic world. It actually comes from the southern part of Arabia, and then they also grew coffee plants, the Arabs did, in East Africa.
Maybe they should have had a Starbucks there.
Starbucks, yes, there is a Starbucks in Jordan.
Sound good.
There's a Starbucks in Jordan. Yeah, did you go to it?
Yeah, we went to the one in like the mall in Amman, but it tastes like dirt. It's not. I'm also from Seattle though, so Starbucks is like.
Oh, okay. But so you went to, there is more than one Starbucks. The Starbucks, first one I ever saw was not far from a mall, but there's more than one mall. But yes, they do have it. In fact, that was the first Starbucks mug I ever bought, was in Amman. So, oh, this is kind of neat. And it said Jordan on it. It had part of Petra on it. And so I got that. And then, several years later, I was in China, and I went in Beijing, and I went into a Starbucks. And they had a mug that said Beijing. And I thought, well, you know, how many times am I going to be in Beijing? So I did that. And that's got it started. Now I have about 40 of those, 35 of those mugs from all around different parts, different states, different parts of the world, including India. And so I try to actually find out where the Starbucks are and see if I can get there. So my rule is I have to buy it in that country. Just because I've visited, I can't order it on it. That's my own rule. For example, I didn't get one in Stockholm. We drove right by it on the bus, and then I could not find it because I was on a tour, you know, and it's hard to. Stockholm, yeah. Well, anyway, I got a syndrome while I was there, but everything else was fine. So this is, you know, but the coffee shops actually became, the coffee houses became a place of defiance early on in Islamic culture. Because, you know, they're forbidden from drinking alcohol. And so coffee becomes the social beverage, I guess, or whatever, an event. And especially men would go to coffee houses and sit around and talk and drink coffee and stuff like that. But this is where political troubles would sometimes begin, you know, because they would start critiquing the government. So I think it's interesting that's happening. And this scene looks very familiar. You could see this kind of scene in Jordan. See, drinking tea, coffee, and juice. Some smoke nargila, water pipes, while an oud player takes the stage to accompany a poet about to read from his work. So, nargila, that's a hubbly bubbly, as they're called. It's a water pipe. Which they are often, you often see that, you sort of see those kinds of things going on at coffee shops as well. Smoking the big water pipe and sitting around and talking. This is pretty common. Anything else that caught your eye about this article? Mm-hmm.
Experience in community, so it was just a really symbolic thing to happen.
All right, very good. Well, you know, I'm hoping that these newspaper articles will give us opportunity to speak about some things that you read and you find are interesting, and obviously it's going to be more current kinds of things. Here's one now. Is this also from the Jordan time? It is. Look at that guy. Yeah, see, that's what I need. I need guys to walk around with me. I'll wear blue sunglasses and get a couple guys to walk around with me like that as I go around campus or around Lakeland. You know, and I'll be smiling, everything's fine, but then I'll have these guys with the automatic weapons. All right, so this one is about Egypt. Ex-Army officer poses growing security threat. Fears of extremist sympathizers date back to Sadat's death. Sadat. Anybody remember Sadat? Probably not.
Anwar, Sadat.
Anwar, yes. All right, well, tell us about this. Was yours, right?
There's growing concerns that veterans and currently serving members of the Egyptian military and militaries across the Arab world are becoming radicalized and joining
Okay.
extremist groups. For Egypt, as an example, there's an insurgency in the Sinai, and officers who are discontent with the current government desert and join these groups.
So, interesting. So this is the idea that some military officers and others not happy with the current government are actually going and joining units that are not official units, or are they official units of the military?
Insurgencies.
What's that?
Not official.
Not official. So they're kind of like a militia. They're sort of forming their own armed military group.
The man that this article is about, he
Uh-huh.
was a former Egyptian commando. He went to the Sinai, formed a group, and he recently ambushed a group of Egyptian police officers, killing them.
Abdel Hamid, Ansar al-Islam. Okay. Special forces and a police officer stand guard. Okay. So, yeah, this is interesting. So some members, well, you know, in Egypt, what's been the case for a long time, and really it's kind of a model for what we see elsewhere in the Middle East, is that you've had very strong central government. That's what, you know, we had for years. You had Sadat. You had Nasser, Nasser's successor, Sadat, Sadat's successor, Mubarak. Maybe you've heard of Mubarak. When Mubarak he was, I don't know, probably in his 70s, reportedly he had cancer and so forth, but he had ruled Egypt for many years with a very strong arm. And he used the military to help him do that. But there were growing elements dating, like you're saying, all the way back to Sadat. Sadat was assassinated in a military parade. He was watching a military parade and he was assassinated, in part because he made peace with Israel. Sadat negotiated a peace treaty with Menachem Begin, the Camp David Accords, when Jimmy Carter was president. That did not go over well with a lot of people. They thought he had sold out. He'd sold out Egypt. And so what we see is he was assassinated. When things really didn't change, after Sadat came Mubarak, then this sort of Islamic conservative, I guess we could call them fundamentalists, people like to call them that, but certainly they don't agree with the central government and they want to turn things more religious, at least their interpretation of it. And so they began a concerted effort to try to disrupt the Egyptian government. One of the ways to do that was to disrupt its number one income, which was tourism. And so they would target tourist sites, things like that. And so that has, in large measure, that and since the Arab Spring, which was now several years ago, the tourism in Egypt is on a serious decline. Even though the sites entice people, a lot of people won't go. And, like you said, in the Sinai, there has been a lot of activity of this nature because it is remote, you know, it's kind of hard to get there through the desert. Even the monastery there's a monastery called St. Catherine's that's which is near Mount Sinai. It has been there. It's the longest continuously operated monastery in the world. It's been operated since, well, I think it began probably in about the 5th century AD, and monks have lived there ever since. In fact, one of the monks who lives there, I know, and I invited him to speak in Kentucky when I was there. He came and spoke. He's actually the librarian of the monastery. And the library is famous there because it has books, of course, dating back till the 4th or 5th century, as well as manuscripts of the Bible, and a letter from Muhammad that basically said, leave these monks alone.
How do you write a letter if you can't read a letter?
Well, it's in his name. It's in his time. Yeah, that's good. So we have violence in the Sinai. What else you want to say about this? So what are they saying is going to happen?
Just due to the unrest, that increasing numbers of officers are deserting and defecting to these groups.
Are they saying what the unrest is about?
Just the upheaval of Morsi coming into power and then being deposed by al-Sisi and the crackdowns that the military government have started.
Yeah, so in the aftermath of I remember I was teaching this class when the Arab Spring thing was happening several years ago. And so we were going through these articles and things. And there was a big push at that time for everybody to think that social media was going to carry the day, say in a place like Egypt. People were going to get on Twitter and stuff, and I'm sure that had an effect. But people were just really talking that up in the United States, which always struck me as strange, because I thought that in the Middle East, you've only really had a couple of models, right? Maybe 2 or 3, all of them with extremely strong rulers. You've had a sort of dictatorship, a president / for life kind of dictator sort of person who is normally backed by the military that he controls. Or you've had strong kings, dynasties of kings, like say in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, so forth. And that's about it. Then I guess you could say Iran had a takeover of extreme religious leaders. So those are the 3 sort of models, right? And all of them involve very strong, top-down decision making. None of it involves democracy. But the idea was that the Arab Spring was going to bring democracy to the Middle East, bring the power to the people. And I remember them talking about that. And I can remember telling the class, even though we were in the midst of the Arab Spring, I said, well, one of 2 things is going to happen, let's say in Egypt. You're either going to have a takeover by the Islamic Brotherhood and have a very extreme, conservative Islamic government with strong leader, or you're going to have the military resurge itself and take over. And what ended up is both. Both happened, right? Because at first, the Islamic Brotherhood were the only ones who were really organized. They set forth a candidate whom they got elected, but he began to impose not democracy, but the ideas of the Islamic Brotherhood, which had been around for a long time, a very strict culture and so forth. A lot of people didn't like that. And then eventually, he was ousted by the military. And so now you have a military ruler in place in Egypt, much in the mold of a Mubarak or a Sadat, somebody like that. And so now I think what we're seeing is then some of the guys who are actually in the military who had those leanings, and a lot of them, I think probably if we trace that, I haven't looked at your article carefully, they probably came into power in the military during the time when the Islamic Brotherhood was in charge, right? And so anyway, their loyalties are that way, and they're sort of being ousted, so now they're going out and forming their own, I guess I'll call it militias, or factions anyway, militarized factions. Interesting. Military also not commented. Sisi appointed a new military chief of staff the week after the attack. They've gotten stronger, it says. Anything else you want to say about this article? Abdul Hamid's family heard nothing of him until he was killed by Egyptian warplanes 2 weeks after the Western Desert ambush.
Just, that a lot of Arab armies, when they were established, they were trained by the French and British, and that's established a secular tradition, and that's kind of been what they've been ever since.
That's a good
So
point.
A lot of the recruits who are overtly religious, they feel discriminated against, and that sort of creates situations. Like
Yeah, because the military, you're right, they were trained by British, French, or so forth. And also the military has been seen as the, I want to say, sort of the right hand of the political arm. And sort of the keeper of, that things will not get too far gone, like too far religiously. You see the same kind of thing. Interestingly, nobody, I think, picked anything from the Turkish Daily News. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there with that, because they had a secular nation constructed after World War I, and the military has been pivotal in keeping that a secular nation. However, more recently, the current president has been able to stay in power for a long time, and he is more and more moving them towards Islamic principles. And what's always happened in the past when that has happened is that the military has staged a coup, gotten rid of the leader, and they gotten a new leader in there. But they tried to stage a coup, and I don't really know if that was, I wonder if that was a actual military coup, or if it was a kind of staged military coup to even strengthen the president even more, because that happened about a year ago, and it was put down, and it's even strengthened the president even more. Well, let's see. Let's move on. What do we got here? Jerusalem Post. A lot of ads. EU to U.S. You can't solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict alone. So here's a picture. Donald Trump and EU Foreign Policy Chief Federic. Yeah. A lot of ads on this one. I don't know what this is down below, but oh, you can join the Army National Guard. Okay, there you go. Good. Let's see if we can get that off of there. That kind of distraction. And chairs, which also reminds me, I just bought an office chair, so that's why they're trying to sell me a very expensive office chair.
That chair is $2,000.
Well, you got to pay for quality, my friend.
What's you?
Well, what is this one about then? The United States cannot be the sole broker for peace. Whose article? That was yours. All right.
It talks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what the EU is saying, that the United States like can't solve the conflict alone, and it also said that the conflict can't be solved without the United States. It talked about how President Trump said in December that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and as a result,
Yes.
that really infuriated the Palestinian people that were there to talk about the negotiations.
Sure.
As a result, they left, and it talked about all Trump was saying, that he wasn't it was kind of just historic fact, a religious thing, based on history, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's all he meant by it. So I think some of it was wrong interpretations by the Palestinians, it bothered them.
Well, if you go to Jerusalem, when you go on the excavation with me next summer, we'll go to Jerusalem, and you'll get to see the Knesset. The Knesset is basically sort of like the Congress, the legislative body of Israel. That's in Jerusalem. It's in the west part of Jerusalem. So in reality, certainly Jerusalem functions as the capital of Israel. Tel Aviv has been listed as the capital, and that's where where the United States embassy would be, and many other countries have their embassies there in Tel Aviv, to avoid the political fallout. In fact, I think what happened recently is that since, boy, I'm thinking all the way back at least to the 80s, maybe before, every United States president has had to sign, I think every 6 months to a year, they've had to sign an order overriding moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Because officially, you know, with the UN and the UN resolutions and all kinds of other stuff, Jerusalem is the functioning capital. And so to avoid that, the U.S. has had this sort of workaround whereby it's going to be a temporary order that says that the embassy is going to be in Tel Aviv and it's going to stay in Tel Aviv. Donald Trump didn't sign that order when it came around. And therefore, by default, so it's not actually, I suppose you could say technically, he's not ordering the embassy to be there. That order has been there for 30 years. But he didn't override it as his predecessors have done, both Republican and Democrat. And part of that, I think, you know, he did speak about it in the campaign trail that you know, some people ask him to do it. So, but it's very controversial because Jerusalem is also claimed to be by the capital of the Palestinians. They want it to be their capital. They have been kind of forced out, and so they have made their capital a very nearby Ramallah. Ramallah is just north of Jerusalem, I don't know, 10 miles, let's say, 12 miles. And that has become their de facto capital. However, they lay claim to Jerusalem, and you know, Jerusalem was controlled by the Arabs, and when the state of Israel began, they actually pushed, that is those who are establishing the nation, pushed for a narrow corridor of land along a road to push to the western part of Jerusalem so they could try to lay claim to Jerusalem, even though they didn't really have much territory in Jerusalem. So, and then, of course, after 1967, then they've occupied or taken over the rest of Jerusalem. But they've still for a long time, East Jerusalem was sort of left to its own. And it's only been, say, in the last 8 to 10 years that they've really began to crack down on East Jerusalem. By that I mean the government of Israel. So there's a lot of symbology here, a lot of symbolic action, a lot of ideas here in allowing the U.S. Embassy to open. I don't think it's opened yet. You're going to have to build one, I suppose, in Jerusalem. And I'm sure it's going to be the site of lots of tensions, protests, so forth. So it'll. So what do you think? Do you think this is a good idea to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, or should it just stay in Tel Aviv, where it's been for a long time? I've tried to give you a little background.
I'd probably just leave it where it is.
Leave it in Tel Aviv. Certainly leaving it in Tel Aviv would be the less comfort, or the less amount of conflict will come out of that by allowing it or having it move to Jerusalem. While technically true, that is the capital. What's going on now? It doesn't like being stationary. Nothing without the United States, nothing with the United States alone. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you know, it will be controversial, and I suppose, I mean, I don't know when this move's going to take place. I'm hoping it doesn't happen in June of this year. Wait till I'm gone.
Summer starts with a bang.
Yeah, literally. Let's see. Do we do this one?
I think it's good.
Yeah, you got a question? Go
We're
ahead.
gonna go over the, what section we can do.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. I forgot about that. We got a couple of minutes. All right, well, I'll leave this up and let me just pause this out. We'll talk about that.